right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power, and today we've got the results of the 2024 Prague Pro. Arguably, really delivered on being potentially one of the most exciting shows of the year outside of the Olympia or the Arnold. So it really met the expectations that I think a lot of us had for this show. They really came through. This was a great show all the way through. Very interesting with it being a two-day show. And Chris Bumstead, with his open bodybuilding debut, really delivered. So overall, just a fantastic show, extremely entertaining both days. But first and foremost, congratulations to Martin Fitzwater, who won the Prague Pro, defeating Chris Bumstead. Chris Bumstead ended up taking second place at this show, which is a fantastic placing for Chris. I know it's not the super entertaining outcome that everybody wanted to see. I know the outcome that would have blown the roof off the internet would be Chris Bumstead winning this show. But I think that what Chris was able to do at this show was nothing short of impressive. To me, he looked fantastic. He looked like he belonged standing with those open guys. His posing was phenomenal, hitting the open poses that he's not used to hitting in classic physique. I think he was also the most detailed guy in that lineup. And I also feel like he didn't look as small as a lot of people expected him to look next to these open guys. And I think, again, going back to the amount of time that Chris had to prepare for this show, placing top two, and in my opinion, really pushing Martin, who, again, is a top 4 Olympian, although I felt like he was a little bit off looking back at prejudging specifically. But that's the beauty of this being a two-day show, is I felt like Martin would come back better the next day, tighter at finals, and that's what it looks like he did. So that's kind of the unique part about having a two-day show, because I felt like Chris really pushed him at prejudging, and I felt like Martin looked better at finals. Although I will say, when the scorecards came out, I was surprised to see that Chris didn't have any judges that had him in first at prejudging specifically, or finals. It was unanimous both ways. So again, congrats to Martin. And the other placings, your top 3 was Martin in first, Chris in second, and Sean in third. Matthias Holweck ended up in 4th place. Christian Wolski ended up in 6th, Horse MD in 5th. But I was surprised to see that it was unanimously Chris in second, and that it wasn't closer than that. But I think at the end of the day, the reason for this is, even though Chris's physique seemed to draw everybody's eyes to Chris because of his posing, because of the detail on his physique, because of his shape, because of his conditioning, at the end of the day, we have to keep in mind this was still open bodybuilding. Size does matter more in open bodybuilding, and I know that we're so used to seeing Chris in classic physique, but Martin has filled out his frame in a way that Chris has not filled his out yet. So I think, especially looking at the scores being unanimous, Martin just had size that Chris just hasn't had time to put on, didn't have time to put on for this show. And that's something that we talked about really the entire build-up to this show. Is this is an extremely short amount of time for Chris to make this transition. It's not like we're going to see a much bigger, much different looking Chris, probably just slightly fuller, and I feel like that's what we saw. And I realize that now that Chris placed second here, he didn't win the show, he didn't get the Open Olympia qualification for 2025. It's probably much less likely that he's going to come out of retirement and continue to compete in open bodybuilding than it would have been if he won this show and got that qualification. But even though he was second, I still kind of selfishly, as a fan, want to see him pursue open bodybuilding in the future if it doesn't have a crazy impact on his health or his family time, which it probably would. Because like I said, even placing second here, I still felt like he really pushed Martin. Even if the scorecards don't necessarily reflect it being very close, I think to me and a lot of you guys, it certainly felt like Chris was pushing Martin. And I think that in and of itself, taking second to a top 4 Olympian, and a lot of people felt that it was close, is a massive achievement for Chris, considering that he had like zero time to prepare for this. I mean, let's be honest, 4 weeks is nothing. And I think that's part of what made the package that he brought so impressive, is I think a lot of us did adjust our expectations and say, okay, he had a short amount of time to prepare for this. Let's just not expect anything crazy from Chris. Let's just be happy to see him in an open lineup and hope for the best. And that's kind of the mentality that I went into this show with. And I think that's what we got. We kind of went in with no crazy high expectations, and Chris, I think, over-delivered on the expectations that most people had for him in open, and it was really, really impressive. But congratulations again to Martin. I figured I would probably end up talking a lot about Chris since that was one of the big focuses of this show, but I do think Martin deserved to win. And actually, that was my initial prediction before I switched to Chris, was Martin first, Chris in second, Sean Clarita in third. But I was just so impressed by Chris yesterday, I had to switch it to predicting Chris to win because that's the most entertaining outcome. And Chris looks phenomenal. And I don't know what the future holds for Chris. If this is like legitimately him and Hani, they're done, they're retired, they're never coming back. You know, Chris kind of insinuated that that's not the case for him, at least, especially when he was asked about next year's Mr. Olympia. He kind of gave that, charming grin as a response to whether or not he'll stay retired, whether or not he'll do the 2025 Mr. Olympia, whether or not he'll continue competing in open. He kind of just gave that kind of coy smile as a response and said, you never know, maybe, every year he kind of reconsiders. So maybe we'll see Chris back on an open stage one day. I just keep thinking if he was able to do this well and look this good at this show, stand with these guys, and I saw people say like, this is not an elite lineup, so that's why Chris did well. I disagree. I think this was a really good lineup. I think a lot of these guys brought it, including Horse MD, including Christian Wolski, fourth place Matthias Holwick, but Horse looked a lot better than he looked in Romania. And I think it's crazy to say Chris only did well here because it wasn't a great lineup. You had a top 4 Olympian, who, granted, Chris did not beat. You had Sean Clarita, a former 212 Olympia champion, who, by the way, looked a lot better than he looked at the Olympia. Can we acknowledge that him working with Boss of Outlaw now seems to be a good decision for him? He looked really good here. So I think to say Chris only did well because this was a weak lineup is a little bit disingenuous. I think what made Chris exciting here was the battle of him and a top 4 Olympian. I wouldn't call that a weak battle or a weak lineup. Not to mention that Chris himself was in this lineup, and he's a 6-time Classic Physique Olympia champ. I don't think there was anything weak about this lineup, anything weak about this show. I still stand by, I think this was one of the best shows of the whole year. I'd say the most excited and entertained I've been watching a top 2 in a bodybuilding show in a very, very long time. So that being said, my point was I do think the second place finish is impressive. And I would like to see Chris continue to try to flesh out the idea of Chris in open and spend a significant amount of time making that transition. Not 4 weeks, not 4 months, like a whole year. If Chris was able to do this well in that amount of time, I mean, just imagine a whole year of preparation for an open show. He didn't even know he was going to do this show after the Olympia. I mean, it was super unplanned, short-sighted. I don't know if short-sighted is a good word for it, but just spontaneous. I think Chris proved here that even though the judging criteria is clearly different between classic physique and open bodybuilding, he proved here that his physique is built to perform in either one. He can perform in men's open bodybuilding. I think the only thing holding him back was that he just didn't have enough size yet for open. I don't think he looked small, but like I said, I felt like Martin, his frame is just much more developed and filled out than Chris's is. And I think that's really what it came down to. Everything else, Chris nailed. His shape was great. His posing was great. His conditioning was great. Detail, like just a great look overall. I just think the one variable that Chris really had no control over for this show was the size. He just didn't have time to put that size on. And I think if he did have time to do that, he'd be a phenomenal open bodybuilder, 100%. I think the only limiting factor here was the amount of time that he had, which was basically none, to put on size for open. But anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. And again, congratulations to Martin. I know because the entertaining outcome did not happen, there will probably be a lot of people that don't like the fact that Martin won, because obviously the thing that would have blown up would be Chris Bumstead winning. But again, I want to reiterate, I do think that Martin deserved to win. And I know I talked about Chris a lot in this video, even though Martin won. But honestly, I do think Chris doing this show was really the heart of this story, and I think what made this show so exciting. And I think people will still be talking about this topic for weeks and months to come. The potential that Chris has as an open bodybuilder, I think, to me at least, is undeniable after watching him this weekend. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, click that bell notification icon if you have not already. And as always, I love you guys, appreciate you guys. Nick Strength and Power, signing out. All right, guys, don't forget to click that like button and subscribe to this channel if you enjoy the content. Also, check out my Instagram at NICKS&P, my Facebook page, which is simply Nick Strength and Power, my secondary YouTube channel, Nick Strength and Vlogs, for vlogs and bonus content that you will not see on this channel. And consider subscribing to my third YouTube channel, Nick Strength and Pokemon, which is all things Pokemon and trading card games, completely unrelated to this channel. So if you're into that, give that one a look. And all links to merchandise and social media will be in the description box below. If you guys want a Nick Strength and Power t-shirt, that will be in the Shopify link below. Have a great day.